You're watching Experience Comic Culture and Sales, streaming live daily to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter.
2, 1.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Devil's Advocates. I'm one of your hosts, Christopher, a.k.a. the Bronze Age Nerd, and I was just watching Into the Spider-Verse, Across the Spider-Verse, the sequel, with my daughter and my wife, and I'm not finished with it yet. I had to stop the movie before we went on the air here, but man, it's a good movie. It's a really good movie. I love the style. I love the animation. I love the composition, the way that they're incorporating comic book art into that film. And what a perfect movie to use as a fulcrum to talk about our topic tonight. Because Hollywood comic books are so incredibly intertwined at this point that a new series can't come out without talking about, will it be a TV show? Will it be a movie? Some of the most popular comic books from the last 20 years have been adapted into films now that are really popular, or TV shows. And you'd think, oh, that's a good thing. That's great for comic books. And in some cases, you might be right. But in other cases, it might be a little more complicated than that. And that's what we're going to get into tonight on the Devil's Advocates, whether or not comic books and Hollywood go together. Stay tuned. So right now, it was supposed to go to this really cool intro, and that didn't happen. But
that thing where you click the button twice so it doesn't play the first time, and then it just starts playing randomly in the middle of a sentence.
I love it.
I'm so tired.
For those, a little peek behind the EXP curtain here. We're usually helped out by producer Jay. He is on vacation right now, so Kyle's holding down the fort solo and on the air. So obviously that creates
well, and sometimes. Like I started my first live today at 3:30 Eastern. It is now 10:07 Eastern.
Yeah.
So I've basically been in this chair pressing these buttons for 7 straight hours. So yeah, super fun.
Oh,
speaking of super fun, hey everybody, guess what?
You can win a free comic book during this show.
Yeah.
Is it in what? Hold on. Is it in a bag and a board, or is it in a giant hunk of plastic with a big number on top?
No, it's in one of those stupid plastic things that means you can't read it anymore.
Hey, Thomas knows what to do. This is the key right here, everybody.
Put hashtag EXP2K, all caps, in the comments to be entered for a chance to win a free graded comic. And here's the deal, because I know that some of the other people who are here have already won. Enter again.
Bum, bum, bum.
I can't promise you'll be able to win, because obviously we got to make sure nobody else, who hasn't won, win. But if only people who have already won enter, I think we found a loophole in the game.
Someone must win. It's like
I maybe should have asked, our friends at Dynamic Forces, hey, what do we do if we have a show where the only people who enter are people who've already won? And they would have said, you're on drugs. Stop that.
How is that possible?
What?
Well,
that I'm on drugs, or that they would say that? Oh, okay.
No, that everybody that entered would have already won. It's because our show is so great that they all came and watched it, even though they already won a slab.
It's true. Okay. It's super true. And we're actually, some of the slabs that we still have to give away are slabs that people didn't claim. They didn't fill out their form fast enough, so we're rotating some back around.
Ooh.
I have met our friends at Dynamic Forces. That's why they would ask me if I was on drugs. The answer would be yes. Tylenol. Because this is a hard chair. And I've been sitting here for so long, I had to take Tylenol because my butt. Anyway.
I mean, we could always change it up to hashtag hard share.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good. Hashtag hard cheese, maybe.
There we go.
But so today's topic is, are comic books good, or comic book movies good for comic books?
Are comic books good? News at 11.
Right. Are comic book movies good for comic books? And by a show of hands in the comments, who here has watched the Dan Wickline show where I've talked about this at absurd and obscene lengths? Hey, Curtis is here because he wants to hear the topic. So right now, Curtis is basically our winner by default.
That's true.
No, there's some other people entered who haven't won yet, which is spectacular. I'm so happy and so jazzed about all of that. So,
well, hold on. Before we kind of buried the lead here, because some people watching that haven't entered probably haven't, they may not know the deal here. So the EXP went over 2,000 subscribers. So that's awesome. If you happen to be watching and you want to add to that total and you're not subscribed already, you may want to do that. I'm just saying there's a little button down there you can hit. So just saying. But that's awesome.
True though. Here's the deal. I dislike almost every comic book movie ever made. With a few exceptions, I dislike them all. And so the answer to this question for me is very simple. No. Comic book movies are not what's the word for?
Good for comics?
Yes. Good for comics.
Okay, so Kyle is going to take that stance. I'm sure that's a more nuanced topic that we'll get into, of course. I'm going to take my usual stance of it depends on what aspect we're talking about. And I think that there are good and bad ramifications for the success of comic book movies in this century. So it should be really interesting. Now, I think one thing...
I want to take a minute because this is literally happening. I'm watching it in real time. I want to shout out Matt268, who thinks his slab came today. Matt just gifted, and I watched it happen in real time, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 memberships to the experience to his friends in the chat. And I just want to thank you for spreading the word, Matt.
Wow.
The best thing you can do is to spread the word. Maybe 5. I don't know. I don't know how this works. I've never watched this before. So 5 memberships to his friends. Matt, thank you so much for spreading the word. That is the only way these things grow, is if you spread the word. So I appreciate you.
Yeah, and Matt, you're fantastic. He's a channel member over on my channel too. And when I saw you win the other day, I was super jazzed for you, man. Congratulations.
He doesn't know how these things work either. So we're still learning. It's great. I really wanted to shout that out, and I appreciate you for doing that, man.
That's cool.
Okay, let's get back into the nuance of why comic book movies are bad for comic books.
Yeah, so we kind of revealed our positions a little bit. What, in your opinion, is the biggest reason why comic book film... Now, you said you don't like a lot of them or all of them at this point. So is that the reason why you don't think they're good for comic books, or is it something different?
No. The reason I think they're bad for comic books is really simple, actually. So often comic book movies have so little to do with the source material that it actually winds up creating a barrier to entry for comic books. The number of people who came into my shop after Endgame and Infinity War came out looking for comic books that would reflect what they had seen in the movie was actively it was obscene, and it was hard to talk to people because they think they know and they have no idea. So now I have to sell them on a Silver Surfer comic, and Silver Surfer's not even in the movie. And I have statistics and stuff we could talk about later that relate to Black Panther and some of these other things. But the big thing is that comic book movies are essentially action movies with licensed IP. right? Essentially what they're doing is they're licensing a character and making a movie with this character and basing it not at all on the years of established history of that character, or very little on the years of established history of that character. So now you have a bunch of people who don't know anything about these characters coming into comic shops, wanting to learn about these characters, and you're making the comic book retailer be the guy who says, okay, but I need you to understand that scene in Endgame where what's his face? Hulk falls through the ceiling of the Doctor Strange's sanctum.
Sanctorum.
Yeah. That's actually supposed to be Silver Surfer. Well, Silver Surfer wasn't even in the movie. You know, like these kind of concepts that it's hard to explain to someone who has no sort of introduction or no sort of base knowledge. So it hurts comic books because all of a sudden you've created a lore in the movie that doesn't match the lore of the comic books, and you're expecting people to go into comic book stores to buy books, or you're sending people into comic book stores to buy books, and you've created a sector. So now they have to learn to separate the two at the very beginning.
So I have to respond to that because it's interesting because I think there are aspects to comic book movies that are actively bad for readers and comic book stores and, you know, by extension, the comic book business, right? But I don't know that that's the number one reason that I would select. Oh, get an echo here. There we go. Okay.
Go in.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's just
Sorry.
the phone lines are open.
There we go.
And whenever I turn those on, it causes an echo for the first second or two.
Sorry, I just want to make sure I wasn't going to blast everybody out if I kept talking.
No.
So about that though, like here's the thing. I think that it's like looking at a double-edged sword and only paying attention to one side, because you said it yourself. People were coming into comic book shops. So
but if they can't make a sale because the product they want doesn't exist, then they've come into my shop, taken my time that I could have been doing something else to make money, and then made no money.
Well, counterpoint, here's the flip side of that. If they come in and the first thing they're like, look, the first thing I have to tell you is it isn't the Hulk that drops to the ceiling in the Sanctum Sanctorum. Yeah, I can see why that didn't get converted into a sale. That's not the salient point. The point is maybe to warn them, hey, just so you know, like there's a bigger history here and the story's different. But that's a little bit on the shop too to engage that customer. And I think everybody's used to the adapted version, the movie version, the TV show version being different than the source material. As a lover of a lot of the movies like Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park that came out, it's like, hey, you got to get used to the fact that this is a different story to some extent. It has different objectives and different things that get carried out.
If you have base knowledge of that information, which, and again, I'm talking, you're talking about you, right? Like, which is, if I go see a movie and I want to read the book of that movie, I know that the movie and the book aren't necessarily going to be the same because I'm an adult who exists.
Yeah.
But when you have a 10, 12, 13-year-old kid coming into the store and it's all they've ever done is see the Marvel movies, and they expect Thor to be like Thor from the movies. They expect Captain America to be like Captain America from the movies. They expect Iron Man to be like Iron Man from the movies. And all of a sudden, you're witnessing in a story where Thanos really gets defeated because of the Wasp, which is part of what goes into that story. And Wasp wasn't even in the thing that you saw that made you have interest in seeing it and reading it. That's going to be not only disappointing, but it's going to be frustrating for you as a potential new reader. I have way less problem with comic book movies if they were targeted specifically at adults, right? Or they were targeted at a demographic that I could explain source material to. But when you're talking to a kid who's just like, I want to see Spider-Man fight Thanos. I can give you Galactus. Like, it's a different thing, right? Like, and it's you know, it's this very, it's a very problematic thing that retailers have to do with. Now, if I take off the hat of a person who's in the business, whose business is making money off of comic books, I have a totally different feeling about the movies. But I can't do that because this is my role in this existence, right?
Well, okay, so I kind of, you know, you brought up your point. I kind of gave my counterpoint to that. Fair enough. I'm going to move on, and you know, we can definitely revisit each of these points. This isn't like a debate where that's all said and done. But the world that I come from in my niche on YouTube, dealing with comic books here, has been for some reason I've kind of fallen into the comic book collector niche, not comic book content as in reviews or history or that kind of stuff. A lot of the content on my channel is about people that want to invest in comic books. Now, if you're not familiar with my stuff, I take a different approach to that, and I actually talk about how you probably shouldn't chase the FOMO books that are out there, that kind of thing, which is kind of my bread and butter. But that's I'm still talking about that type of content. And the tent pole that I think you could make the argument that comic book movies are good for the comic book industry is because ever since the MCU really started hitting its stride, let's say with Iron Man 1, you could kind of debate that point a little bit. But I think Iron Man 1 was the first major success. You could say Avengers. A lot of money got funneled into comic book collecting. Like, no doubt, people were picking up, you know, major first appearance characters that like they hadn't before. They were willing to invest in it. People that were outside of the collecting hobby were bringing their money. Now, I know you can make the argument that that's not necessarily always a good thing, but I do think bringing more money into the hobby encouraged things like more series, more writers to get work, more artists to get work, especially as the MCU started to take off. You know, then we have kind of this arms race that sort of happened. If you could call it a race, maybe it'll get to that point now with James Gunn where DC's trying to hit back with their cinematic installments. And there's still multi-billion-dollar films we're talking about here. It's nothing to sneeze at. It's just the success hasn't been the same. And you do, of course, this whole conversation, you have to get to the point where specifically the MCU was the juggernaut. And now that juggernaut might kind of be faltering a little bit in a lot of people's eyes. Some of those films aren't as good. They're not as popular with people. Some of them still are. Like, I think there's a very nuanced conversation that has to happen there. But bringing those people in that want to collect those key first appearance issues, they think like, oh gosh, you know, everybody loves Iron Man, everybody loves Thor. I'm going to go out and try to find those issues and invest in them. Spider-Man, et cetera, et cetera. It does bring money into the hobby, and I think that you can't take that as a net loss, even if it is difficult for retailers to navigate sometimes because of the people coming in being unfamiliar with comic books.
So we'll get into that in just a minute. I'm going to tell a Black Panther story.
All right.
But before we do that, we're going to take a commercial break because I need a Mountain Dew. But when we come back, we're going to talk about, Bronze's point of it brings money in the industry and talk about some of the other issues surrounding this. I actually have two things I want to talk about in terms of money becoming in the industry and comic collecting. So when we come back from our break, we're going to do that. Also, the phone lines are open. If you want to talk about this topic with us, you can call in. It's scrolling right at the bottom of the screen, 567-318-6507. Don't call in the next, say, 30-ish seconds because I'll be getting a Mountain Dew, but you can call after that.
Post Mountain Dew.
Yeah, and we'll be right back.
There's something for every imagination at your local comic shop. Visit comicshoplocator.com to find a store near you. You just finished the last episode of your favorite new show, and you just have to talk about it. But all your friends are ghosting you because of that incident last week at the buffet. Oh, you know the one. What you did to that chowder. Ugh. Keeps me up at night. So what do? Join writer Dan Wickline as he breaks down all your favorite pop culture media. Whether it's a review of the latest nerdy TV show or a dive back into the history of your favorite comic characters, Dan's ready to discuss all the hottest topics live. Join the conversation as Dan live streams Tuesday through Thursday at 5 Eastern, 2 Pacific on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. The Dan Wickline Show on The Experience, Comic Culture and Sales.
Welcome back into Devil's Advocates, everybody. I am producer Kyle. That guy over there is Bronze Age Nerd. And I want to give a second and shout everyone out. Bronze, our friend Rock and Robbie. We found out today that we've been nominated for the Comic Book Community Awards. Not only was the Experience nominated as a channel, but 3 of our shows were also nominated individually. Talking Shop, Comic Collectibles with Rex and John, and Sketch Up with Mel and Mog. So thank you to everyone who's out there. Be watching for how to vote for those things. We're going to campaign real hard because I want to win Best Beard in Comics. Even though I will probably have to go up against our buddy Robbie and probably Bronze in that category as well. But if we can make it a guarantee the EXP wins. Did it just get real dark where you are?
Yeah, my exposure on my camera kept going bright, so I'm trying to get it to knock that off. Sorry.
Okay, because it just looked like...
See, like that.
Right. You just became a pair of eyes, basically. It freaked me out, man. But yeah, thanks to everybody who nominated, and thanks. Be watching for ways to vote on that. We're going to definitely be campaigning for that deal.
Yeah, and just so everybody knows, on August 25th, that's when the finalists will get announced. And I believe voting opens right after that. It's really cool. Congratulations to everybody at the XP that was nominated for their shows. Congratulations to the show for getting nominated. It is fun. I got a couple of them right up there, a couple of the awards. So,
well, and just so everyone knows, regardless of who wins, I'm accepting your awards.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I'm doing it. Don't care. Anyway, so we are talking about our comic book movies good for comic books. And when we left off, Bronze had made a very good point about money coming in the industry. But unfortunately, I have an argument for that.
Okay.
2 things that have existed basically since comic book movies became a thing. In bigger, and I will say this, in bigger, these things have always existed, but they got bigger and more prevalent with the success of the movies. The first one is comic book speculation. It's people coming in and only worrying about what the next hot book is, and not worrying about what the content of the books are, not caring about the content of the books, just trying to find ways to get over on other comic book sellers so that they can forward the book on and make a couple of more bucks. That's the first thing. The second thing is fans who claim to care but actually only care about the drama. So we'll get into that second point in a minute. Speculation is something that, again, that's a whole other day for a whole other topic. And we've talked about it before, how I feel about speculators and comic flippers and people who do that. But the thing I want to talk about is Black Panther. When the first Black Panther movie came out, I went and saw it the second time with my friend Imani, who, if you've been around in the experience long enough, you know Imani. He used to host a show, Black Comics Universe. here on the channel BCU. He still runs Black Comics Universe, the channel. He is an expert in Black indie comics and Black comics as a whole. Himself and Marcus Roberts from I'm going to forget, Second Sight Publishing and a few others work together, and they compile a lot of great data. I went with him, and among the people who were there were these women who showed up in full church gear. You know, the dashikis and the hats, and they were ready to go. They have no idea who Black Panther in terms of T'Challa is. But they knew that this was a Black superhero movie. When the numbers came out about how many tickets that movie sold, I did the math. If 1% of the people who went and saw that movie went into a comic shop and bought the new Black Panther book that had come out that week, written by Ta-Nehisi Coates, one of the best Black Panther stories in recent history, every comic shop would have made about $5,000 that first week. Do you know how many extra copies I sold?
I'm like a 0.
Yes. Across the board, less than 1% more of that book sold. Most stores saw no increase in sales in the Black Panther comic book after that movie came out. That was an audience of people who had no introduction to comic books, didn't know anything about comic books, went and saw their first superhero movie, are a relatively, at the time, especially underserved comic market. That has certainly changed since then. There's certainly more of a market now. But people weren't coming in and buying comics. So there's more money in the industry, but not going to the market that the industry is built on. Those people were spending money on eBay, on Amazon, at Barnes & Noble, and at Books A Million. Because there was nothing in that movie to point people to local comic shops.
Yeah, that's true.
The problem I have at the most base level is that these movies, one, don't tell the stories they purport to tell. And two, they don't do anything to scratch the back of the industry that has been scratching their back since they moved. You know, when Blank Man came out, the only people who knew that was a comic book movie were comic book people. And since then, we've had more and more comic book movies, and never once has there been an ad at the end for Comic Shop Locator, or find out more about this character in your local comic shop, or any of that kind of stuff, pointing people back to the market that can best service their interest.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And so that, coupled with the idea that now a percentage of the people who are coming into my store are just looking to see if I've made a mistake in pricing my comics so that they can get ahead of whatever speculator app is telling them to sell their new comic book movie book about. Like right now, the rumor is right now that Taylor Swift is going to be the Dazzler in Deadpool 3. I could get behind that because I think Taylor Swift in that costume, you know, like,
I mean, it would be awesome. I just have zero faith that that's a thing.
I'm still I understand, but you know what? The hope is nice.
Yeah.
But now that's going to drive speculation around Dazzler. And so a
Already
portion
has.
of people, right, exactly. But a portion of the people who are going to come into comic shops are going to be looking for someone who's got Dazzler in a $1 bin or in a $5 bin when they know they can sell it for 10, rather than coming in and discussing how great would it be if this happened, or the Dazzler showed up in Deadpool, or, you know, how great is John Romita's art on this book? Like, instead of talking about the comic book, they're just there going, well, I think your price is too high because Key Collector says you should be charging less.
So
that is not bringing money into the industry in a way that helps comic books. It just helps people who aren't in the business, or who are in the business but aren't in the business the same way the bulk of us are or have been for years supporting this.
Okay, I've got two things to say to that. By the way, it's a great point. I think there's kind of like I said at the beginning of the show, I think there's nuance to the points in this conversation. And I'm going to do my best to point those out. First off, about the speculators part. And at some point, we need to talk about it as a topic, because just like Hollywood affecting comic books, speculators affecting comic books is a huge part of it. But I do have to say this one point. That portrayal does paint a pretty broad brush on speculators or flippers or whatever you want to call them, because even though that is true, and that the example you listed is something that plays out all the time, it's not the only aspect that a lot of those people are spending their money in comic books on. A lot of them are doing that for these like hot new keys that come up on apps and lists, and they are doing something that I do, which is selling those and then putting that right back into comic book shops, into older, more established stuff. And now
that's a fair point.
The person arguing over the price on Key Collector or whatever, that would be more of a topic for that other show, maybe, if we're going to do one on that. But when it comes to that, that is something I see all the time. I'm in a lot of groups with a lot of different types of comic book fans. Several of them are comic book speculation groups. And so often, yeah, you'll see posts from people, but then a week later, you'll see a post from them about how they just picked up one of their prized grails and they bought it at a comic shop. So, yeah, of course, sometimes they bought it on eBay too or whatever. But then again, sometimes those places on eBay are comic shops selling on eBay.
Yeah.
So my point is that there's a lot to that has to be added. The second thing is, and you're right, comic book shops can get left out of the loop a lot when it comes to that money finally coming into the shop after the movie. There is no direction saying, go pick up at your local comic book shop, check out local comic shop locator, etc. Those would be awesome. I will give DC like a third of a point for adding the, suggested reading at the end of some of their trailer and announcement content. They don't say where to go buy them, but they do say, hey, if you're interested, here's some starting spots. I also question some of the books they pick sometimes, but that's beside the point. They're trying something, and I appreciate that.
And I will say that if that happened in every trailer or every movie, I would probably, in a big way, flip my opinion on this.
Yeah.
Like that little thing is enough to change the perspective entirely.
And so James Gunn kind of, if you're not familiar, he kind of infamously did something where he posted a couple things on Twitter, or the app formerly known as Twitter, where he said, this is a stack of stuff I'm reading, basically, with a cup of coffee next to it. One of those things was All-Star Superman. All-Star Superman is a fantastic, amazing run. I happen to have all the issues of that. I've read it several times. I was ready to move on from it. I sold it to somebody who wanted to read it because they wanted to get into the story, because James Gunn is out there tweeting about it, and we know they're not flipping those books. They actually wanted to read them. I know that, and this is the other point I was going to get to, I know that a lot of those times what people are doing is they're running to places like you mentioned, Barnes and Noble, booksellers, or also there are comic book shops that carry trade paperbacks in some cases, and they're going back and buying some of those collect editions. I know every time that a major movie came out, back when I was active on Comixology, I'm not as active on there anymore because it's kind of gone through some things. There would always be sales around the time that a movie was coming out, and I'm sure a lot of people picked up old volumes of all of a sudden Ant-Man's a big deal, or Black Panther, or whoever it is, right? And the same thing still happens on places like the Marvel app and all that kind of stuff too. You can still go do that. It's just Comixology was a nice little hub for all of that, and I'm sad it's gone. But there are readers that are coming in that way. Now, I think the point where that shifts is you have to talk about the bad along with the good. And while a high tide can raise all ships, a low tide can lower all the ships. And I don't want to get into any of the quote unquote politics about it, because there are some involved. There are a lot of criticisms of comic book movies as of late. It feels like for 15 films or so, especially with the MCU, we were kind of in a golden era where popular opinion was, Marvel can do no wrong with the MCU. And even as DC was starting to come out, there were fans and there were detractors or whatever. But now every project that gets announced, it seems like there's this immediate, like, it's good, it's bad, and they've just seen the trailer, and that's what they were saying already. Especially a lot of the Marvel projects, it's instantly polarizing. It seems to be that there has to be this discussion about how it's going to suck, or it's going to be the worst Marvel movie ever, or how the MCU hasn't delivered a good movie in 5 years since Endgame, or whatever. And that is also going to hurt comic books just as much as the rise of the MCU ever helped them.
So here's and this is, again, we're talking about my opinion and how I form my opinion. I'm friends with a lot of comic book retailers. Do you have any idea how many GoFundMes I see a week for comic shops that are trying to keep the doors open?
Yeah.
At a time when pop culture and comic book movies were as big as they've ever been, stores are fighting to keep the doors open. So it's fine. You want to go to Comixology and buy something? Great. You want to go to Barnes & Noble and buy something? Great. But when no one cared about comics in the 1990s, people like Nancy McCann and Mike from Fat Jacks, who are both EXP shows, who have been doing this for 30 or 40 years, were carrying the torch for this industry, and they're struggling. Why? Because people don't buy comics based on movies. It doesn't help comics. It helps the big giant companies who aren't paying their writers or their actors a fair wage and want to use AI to replace people. It helps them make mountains of money. But nobody that's here carrying the torch for this stuff is making a dime. And it's killing people. And that, at the end of the day, is the only thing I give a damn about when it comes to these movies. We can talk all day about how if you're going to make a movie and call it Civil War, you should maybe tell the damn Civil War story instead of whatever that movie was that they made. But at the end of the day, if the people who are out here keeping these things afloat when it was bad to be a fan of comic books, when you got beat up for being a comic book fan or playing Dungeons and Dragons, the people who are offering you a space are losing their spaces. And these movies are just as popular as ever. These TV shows are just as popular as ever. Granted, there is some downtick. And don't get me wrong, inflation, bad scripting, bad acting, there's a lot of problems. But at the end of the day, there's still comic book movies and they're still breaking in billions of dollars. But yeah, we have to $20 at a time keep comic book shops open right now.
So it's an impassioned speech. It's 100% a valid speech. What I and I'm not being snarky when I say this. What I question is, and I literally have to think about it, is at what point do you allow for the fact that, from my understanding of how comic book shops have been operating over the last 30 years, that was kind of the trend that was already happening. And then you had this infusion of interest that kind of put a Band-Aid in the MCU, and then eventually in the pandemic, where some shops that were in big trouble all of a sudden were able to start moving some units, and shops opened during that time. Now, a lot of those shops are closing down now that whole, mini bubble has burst, and I understand that. But what I'm saying is, were these speed bumps on a road that has kind of already been going that way?
But if these movies were actually good for comics, they would have repaved the road.
What I'm saying though is it really fair to say that Hollywood has hurt comic books when it comes to the regard that you're speaking of, versus it being just sort of a change in the landscape for a few years?
When I say repaved the road in that instance, I mean a new business model would have presented itself.
Gotcha.
Right? These stores who, you're right, they've been struggling for years, or they've been, things have happened that have caused change. If these movies were actually good for comics, there would be new and developing things that would bolster those things. If these stores had any business sense at all, they could pivot into something. And some of that is what we're doing right now, right? Live sales on social media and stuff. That exists.
Yeah.
But that in and of itself is not enough to keep the doors open. Believe me, I know. I spent almost a year trying to keep my store open. You doing this as my main revenue stream. Like, if these things were actually, if a high tide was actually raising all ships, the high tide of comic book movies were actually raising all ships, then new methodologies would have developed or would be available to these people. But instead, what you have is the same old things available because the new people who are getting into it aren't being told, hey, this thing over here exists. They're not being pushed that direction to this thing that already exists. So they're having to go to places like Whatnot, or to Comixology, or to Barnes and Noble, or Books A Million, or to Walmart and Target, because that's all they know, right? If you think, where do I go buy a book, and you don't know that a local comic shop exists because the thing you're a fan of in the Marvel movies or DC movies didn't tell you that there was a local comic shop for you to go to, you're going to go to a big bookseller. You're going to go on Amazon. Right? Like, yeah, because that's the first place you think of. So it's actually the high tide of combo movies isn't actually raising all ships. It's only raising ones that are able to capitalize on the fact that the most people who go see these movies are people who don't know anything about the industry as it's existed for this long. And that's why I said the little thing that DC is doing by putting suggested reading at the end of a book, or at the end of a trailer, is a huge thing. Huge. And, Barlord said, season 1 of The Flash.
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
I got it.
Yep. The shows are a much better thing, I think, for comic books than the movies. Right? I think that's part of the nuance. I think some of these shows, because they're so frequent, and because now a local comic shop could say, you know what? I want people to know I'm here. I'm going to buy advertising during The Walking Dead or during The Flash on CW. I can do the work now at a relatively affordable rate to spread the news of myself. I don't need them to do that. I can't do that. They're not going to show an ad for my store in the middle of Infinity War. Right? Just before the high point of Infinity War, they're not going to be like, we'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors. Head on over to Crazy Jim's Comic World and buy comic books. It's not a thing. You can buy
the Power Stone is inside the local comic shop.
Right. But you could buy ads before a movie. But how many people get there that early? Before the pre-canned Maria Menounos advertising starts. Right? It's not really a thing. And so that's kind of, at the end of the day, they're bad for comic books because they're only supporting certain methodologies for comic books. If they were supporting everything, then you would have more methodologies that they're supporting, and that retailers, local retailers, small mom and pop shops would be able to capitalize on. The only other thing I kind of have on this tip is this idea that more awareness is a good thing. I don't necessarily buy that more awareness is always a good thing. Because you have to make people aware of the right things, right? It's, if nobody was ever made aware of crack cocaine, we never would have had a crack cocaine epidemic. Like, it's a bad analogy, but it's an analogy I can make. Yeah. So what I'm saying is more awareness of the characters are good, but only if we use that awareness to capitalize on it. We use the awareness to spread the gospel of comic books, but we're not. We're just spreading the gospel of profitability.
So there's a lot there. One thing that comes to mind is, again, just to add that texture to your point, that I agree with the main logic of everything you're saying, but one of the things you talked about earlier, you're talking about how it'd be great if they pointed people to comic book shops, and it would be. I agree. There's no argument for me on that. But obviously, people were finding comic book shops after movies started to hit. They were, because you had the conversation about Hulk and about Silver Surfer and about all these different things, and guess what happened later on? I bet you more people walked in and were curious if your shop had a Funko or a Marvel Legends figure of some of those characters. Now, I'm not saying the margins are the same on figures as they are on comic books, but there is more interest in certain characters now as almost their own brand, which I'm sure helps. I'm sure it helps Amazon and Target and Walmart and all those places a lot more. But that's kind of the second point I want to lead into, which is I almost think part of this argument, and when I say argument, I mean like literally, it's a two sides discussion here. It comes down to the fact that corporatism is the way things have been going for a while now. So when I talk about people buying the collected editions, well, really, who's getting most of that money? The gigantic take of it is Marvel. The comment we had up here from Curtis, that's because the almighty mouse runs it. Money for others is not allowed. And it's through those, sales they're getting, through the numbers they're getting. They're driving it through their best interest for themselves. And that, unfortunately, is how it works. And I'd love to see them understand that bringing comic book shops with them would be better for everybody. But you also have this problem that happens, which is we're talking about you gave the Black Panther example. How many people came in and bought Black Panther? And it's actually, for me, it's a terrible example, but just using that kind of idea, you run into this other problem where a lot of people come in and they pick up a new comic book from that character that's going to be on the screen because they want to check it out. And what happens then? They're lost. They have no idea what's going on in the story. It's, it said it's, Black Panther #1, but it's not the beginning of the story. It's continued from the last volume. It's connected to 3 other comic books that they don't understand and aren't familiar with.
We didn't ask this question. I also don't think comic books are good for comic books.
Yes.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's a different, right. There's a level of that, right? And you brought up Funko Pops and other things. The question wasn't, are comic book movies good for comic book shops? Because there are a lot of those things that are definitely benefited by these movies. We're talking about, are comic book movies good for comic books? And they're not good for that portion of what a comic shop sells. Like, my comic shop sold a lot of manga, right? An anime coming out is way better for manga than a comic book movie is for comic books. Because most of the anime sends people right back to the manga.
Yeah.
That the anime is based on. Right? So, it's this idea of, if we're going to take everything into consideration, my stance actually flips almost entirely. Because for action figures, for things like Funko Pops, for, oh my God, t-shirts and merch like that.
Yeah.
It's a huge thing. And it's way better. But for comic books selling off the shelf, they don't help. And so that's a part of that nuance, right? That's right there, of this idea of, are comic book movies good for comic books? No. Are they good for the industry as a whole? Yes, because you see more sales in Walmart and Target and everywhere else, and that those big companies see that and keep making crap. Right? They keep making stuff. If they didn't sell there, they'd stop making them, right? So for the overall industry as a whole, absolutely. But for comic books as a segment of the population, no.
Yeah, and see, I think that's, we spent a large chunk of the middle of the show talking about comic book shops. And so it really depends on, like so many things we talk about, it depends on how you define the question.
Right.
Is Hollywood good for comic books? And you have to take different slices of that pie. And I think that's 100% true. And that's why I said, to me, it depends. That's what I said at the top of the show. It depends on what aspect we're talking about. Is it good for awareness of comic books? I'd say, yeah. Is it good for comic book readers? In a lot of cases. In a lot of cases, it can also be very frustrating and very damaging. I'm somebody, like, here's my thing. I want more literal interpretations of source material. I think a lot of hardcore comic book fans want that. I think we all kind of draw different lines on where that line is for how realistic it should be. I'm on the extremely realistic, as in, go ahead and make a movie that's just X-Men's Fatal Attraction storyline without any setup or origin or explanation of what's going on. Let the events play out and watch Magneto rip Wolverine's adamantium out of his skeleton and be really confused by the whole thing. And awesome, let's do it. Let's blare the X-Men animated series theme song over all of it and just rock it out. I'm down for stuff like that. I know that probably wouldn't sell in Hollywood. I know that there's a lot of problems with that. Maybe it'd be better for animation. All those kinds of different things get brought into it. But yeah, and so we talked about LCSs. So I think that's kind of an important element that we have to kind of consider. But then there's also the publishers. And
so let's do this, Bronze. Let's take our second break.
Okay.
When we come back, we'll talk about publishers, because I think that is an important part of this, right?
There we go.
It's not something we can ignore in that regard. So let's talk about that. Let's take a quick break. I mean, real short break. And when we come back, we will talk more about from a publisher the publisher side of things, and we'll do our slab giveaway. So
sounds good.
If you want to get in on the slab giveaway, hashtag EXP2K, all caps in the comments, and that will get you entered for the giveaway slab that we're going to give away. And at the same time, this is your last call for phone calls. If you want to call in and get in on this topic, 567-318-6507, 567-318-6507. You can call during the break this time. I still have plenty of Mountain Dew, so I won't be walking away from the phone. So, we will be right back in just a second here on the Devil's Advocates.
There's something for every imagination at your local comic shop. Visit comicshoplocator.com to find a store near you.
What's up, the internet? Welcome back to Devil's Advocates. You guys have no idea how many of those little black and white bumpers are conversations that JD and I have while we're both super exhausted and on the phone. Like, one night I got really obsessed with the definition of hell was, like the legal definition. And that's where it all came from. There's another one where it says he did Speed Farce. That is actually was originally Speed Farts, because we thought that would be funny. So many of these are conversations that we actually have, just so you know, it's really just so you know what kind of goes on up here and why no one else should want to live there. So, we're going to talk about publishers and our comic book movies good for comic books. We're going to talk about publishers, but last chance. We got about 15 minutes or so left in the show. EXP2K, all caps, in the comments to get entered. There are a great number of you watching, and not all of you have entered. Now, if you've already won, we've got enough people now who have entered who haven't won. So I don't want to have to roll the thing 90 times. But, those of you who have already won, congratulations. If you haven't won, get entered. All right. Publishers, go.
Yeah, so when it comes to publishers, it's an interesting one, right? Because not only do they share some of the blame and they get some of the props. I mean, it's just kind of this whole weird thing where you have to kind of get back to it. And I think the interesting one to talk about is always Marvel because of the MCU and everything that's happened with Marvel and the MCU has been, talk about, is it good for comic books? And we talk about those different slices of that pie. We're talking about a company that was repeatedly going through things like bankruptcy and became so successful that the mouse gobbled them up on the back of comic book films to a large extent, which of course was on the back of a bunch of hardworking creators that, I'm going to say it, didn't always get credited the way they were supposed to for that work. But the chain, goes all the way down the road there, and then that's where it ends up. It falls in the lap of Marvel. Marvel has cemented themselves. I remember pre-MCU, try having a conversation now versus then about what's better, Marvel or DC. It used to be that was an extremely tough conversation to have as a comic book fan. And you'd hear, DC a lot. Now you still hear DC a lot, but to be honest, a lot of people say Marvel. So has it been good for that publisher as far as their brand recognition, as far as expanding their empire, making their financial goals for their shareholders, those sorts of things? Yeah, it has. Has it been a smooth road to get there that's been good for everybody? No, it hasn't.
Yeah, I think the publisher part of this conversation falls into our comic books good for comic books conversation.
Yeah.
One of the things that I have been ranting about recently, and it's because it really has started to bother me more than it ever did, is this idea that everything has to be a miniseries because number ones sell better than number twos and so on. And a great example of that is there's a Vampirella Dracula Rage book coming out from Dynamite right now. And I'm going to use this as an example because it's the clearest I can give. It's a new number one, came out last week, but it's actually a number 7 that is continued from the previous series that Christopher Priest wrote, which is actually continued from a series before that. And so you're buying a number 1 and jumping into the middle of the story because, well, we have to reboot this miniseries. Sure, we finished that previous story arc, but now we've got to end and start counting again. And now all of a sudden, if you were jumping in just because it had an amazing cover and you picked it up, you have no idea what the hell is happening.
That literally happened to people that read that. I mean, I've talked to people that's the case.
Right. Exactly. So it's this idea that new miniseries are good because it ups the sales numbers for the publishers. Well, no, it ups the sales for the publishers. It doesn't up the sales for anybody else. And that's part of the idea. I think comic books are doing as much to kill comic books as anything.
Yeah.
But I think having movies that aren't good representations of what's inside comic books is as bad because it creates a bigger hurdle for new readership. And I'm a person who believes that every comic should be able to be someone's first. And if you're making a book that can't be that, then you're doing it wrong.
It's a good point.
And anymore, comic book publishers are doing it wrong.
Well, it's a big part of like serialized fiction, right? Like there's a lot of novel series that I read where every single book, whether it's the first or the 20th, make sure to explain, okay, this is who this character is. This is what they're dealing with. This is what's going on. If you read anything from the Bronze Age, anything from the Copper Age, that's what they do. That's what comic books do.
Right.
Now we don't do that.
Right. Previously on Law and Order, right? Like it works in literally every other medium. Previously on the murder podcast your girlfriend is listening to, yada, 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 yada. It's the only people who don't do that are comic books. And it's not even all comic books. Like there are some companies that do a great job of that.
Mm-hmm.
None of the big ones, but there are some companies who do a great job of it. That said, I want to give comic book publishers credit on one thing. And it's an important thing. Marvel and DC especially have been really good at putting back into print via facsimile edition, via $1 reprint, via trade paperback or hardcover, original source material that these things are supposed to be based off of. I tell you, I sold more copies of Infinity War trade paperback when those movies were coming out than I ever did before or after. Right? And that was only possible because that thing that had been out of print went back into print. And so on that level, I want to say that, some companies are doing a fantastic job.
Yeah.
New re-releases of Invincible when the show hit. So that my favorite example of this is the Walking Dead 50 issue omnibuses that weigh 13 pounds. But all of a sudden, when Walking Dead #1 was impossible to get, and the show is as big as any show on television, here's this massive book that will get you forever.
Yeah.
It will last you a long time. And so that is something that is a good outcome of this.
Yeah, and I think that there's an element that's hard to quantify here where, and I'd argue that sometimes it's bad for comic books as well, but to talk literally about the art for a second. By the art, I don't just mean the illustrations, but I mean the art of the comic book. The art, everything contained within the cover and the back cover of a comic book. Sometimes I think there's some synergy that can happen that's good between the comic books and the movies and the movies and the comic books. And what do I mean by that? Think about the Joker. Think about some of the legendary portrayals of the Joker we've seen in cinema. Cinema can do things that comic books can't. Comic books can do things that cinema can't. And when cinema elevates certain aspects of these characters or these stories, comic books can then find a way to try to one-up or emulate some of those ways as well. I think, Joker is kind of an interesting character to me. I think he's become a more complex character, maybe not better, depending on your interpretations in the comic books since, Batman 89 and the different interpretations we've seen since then, where he's strayed a little bit from the comic book portrayal to the point where so many people think of, Jack Nicholson or Heath Ledger or Mark Hamill's portrayal of those characters that it sometimes gets woven in to the fabric of what that character is in the comic books now and the way they're written. So I think there is definitely this kind of carryover that can happen that can be good. I think that the further extension of what I'm trying to talk about is something that I don't know how it'll be executed. So let's not talk about, all the things that can go wrong. Let's just talk about the concept for a second. What James Gunn is trying to do over at the DCU, where there's this, connection that he's trying to build upon, where the comics and the movies are supposed to be more connected, where storylines are supposed to take place and not necessarily be exclusive to a cartoon or exclusive to a comic book or exclusive to a film, but perhaps more connected for certain aspects of what they're trying to do over there.
That's an important thing.
Yeah.
Because if you remember Marvel sales figures before Iron Man 1, it was their 5th or 6th bestseller. It wasn't even in the top 5. It was awful. And then Iron Man happened and it jumps. And then they start trying to make the character look like Robert Downey Jr. It turned into a whole mess.
Yeah.
But where the movies were successful, like especially that first wave stuff, right? That was arguably the most successful across the board for everyone. Was they were taking characters that weren't top tier characters and using them. DC has always said, well, we're just going to make movies with our tent poles. And guess what you do when you do that? You disappoint literally everyone. Because everyone knows what they think Batman is. Everyone knows what they think Superman is, or Wonder Woman, or Harley Quinn, or Green Arrow, or Green Lantern, or whoever the hell, The Flash. Everybody knows what they expect of those characters. And when your movies don't live up to that expectation, they're disappointed. Whereas people didn't know anything about Peter Quill or about Rocket Raccoon and Groot. The number of people I had to explain the talking tree concept to, it was insane. But it's a great.
They didn't watch Lord of the Rings? What's wrong with them?
Well, that was how I had to explain it. You know those annoying guys from the middle Lord of the Rings movie? Which, by the way, I hadn't even seen until after Guardians 2 came out.
Oh, wow.
By the way, that's the second Lord of the Rings movie is the only Lord of the Rings movie I've ever watched. Anyway.
It's a good one.
It makes no sense if you haven't seen the first, third, or fourth.
It should be a comic book.
Even then, I probably wouldn't read that one. But here, the thing of it is that James Gunn is taking characters that people have no expectations for.
Yep.
And putting them right smack dab in the middle of the movie. And that's the best thing he can do. And I'll be honest, it's the best thing that can happen for comic books. Because now you're going to have these characters. The investors at Warner DC don't have any expectations on how Solomon Grundy's going to do. Right? So when that movie, it makes money, right? A movie featuring Solomon Grundy or Booster Gold is another example. They don't have any expectation as to how that movie is going to do because they're not characters that they can say, oh, these are big, important. Everybody knows this character.
Yeah.
So when those movies make money, they're going to pour money back into those kinds of characters, which is what has always made those companies great. You know, having a good Booster Gold Blue Beetle team-up story is as important for DC Comics in the long run of the history of the company as having a good Superman or Batman book.
Yep.
Right. And what you probably found out, Barlord,
sorry,
is that the people in James Gunn's movies aren't even the freaking Guardians until way late in the Guardians run.
Yep.
This place is the well cut of this. Those are the Guardians. Sylvester Stallone and Miley Cyrus and that dude Michael Rosenbaum who played Lex Luthor. Those are the actual Guardians, which is a super important part of all of this. So,
yeah.
I think that's going to be the telling part. And I'll say this as anti-comic book movie as I've been in this stream and as I've been for a long time. It's this swing that James Gunn is taking that keeps me having faith in comic book movies as a medium.
Yep, I agree. It's one of those things where honestly, a lot's riding on it. DC, I mean, think about it. the DCU experiment, sorry, the DCEU experiment, the Zack Snyder verse of things, was, I think in general perception, I don't think I'm wrong to say it was a failure. Now I think there were some really cool highlights to all of that. Like I had some enjoyable times in parts of that. I did it. I enjoyed the first Suicide Squad movie. And if people tell me that's fine, guess what? A whole hell of a lot of people enjoyed that because I have seen that interpretation of Harley Quinn more times than pretty much any other interpretation of Harley Quinn now.
I will say this. If I had paid for my ticket, I would have stayed. But I won the ticket. So when I got angry, I just walked out because it didn't cost me anything.
I loved it because it was dumb fun. I love dumb fun. Sometimes. Not everything can be that way.
By the way, that's why I like the Shazam movies.
Yeah.
They're not good, but they're dumb fun.
Yeah.
Or the all ladies, Chicago, you want to hang out 1 second? We'll give away a slab in just a second. The all ladies Ghostbusters, same way. Just get stoned and watch that movie and tell me it's not great.
Maybe that's what I should have done for that one. But that whole experiment didn't work. It didn't pan out. Now, if James Gunn tries to rebuild it, launching with a Superman movie, Booster Gold, all these projects we've talked about, some of which are extremely exciting, right? Swamp Thing. If they can't deliver on that universe this time, DC just becomes, it might fail, to be honest with you, because there's been a lot of rumors over the years about selling off DC. They're in trouble. I mean, a lot of the potential value is their ability to produce these films now. And if they can't do it, that's bad for DC. That's bad for comic books. Unless we were able to spin that into a positive thing. But yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it. It's going to be a fascinating, interesting next chapter. And it's why I think it's a fun conversation to have.
So this is, we'll end here and we can have this as a topic for another day. I think this strike comes at the absolute best time for Warner Discovery in terms of the DC movie franchises.
Yeah.
Best thing they could do is stop making movies for a while. And so what's going to happen is all of the movies that are in the can are going to come out. And then they're going to have to make all of the James Gunn stuff, which will take a while. So now there's going to be an actual physical break in their release schedule that will let all of that, because there's nothing coming out. Nobody will be able to say, well, if Zack Snyder had made this movie, it would have been good. Or, gee, we missed the old blah, blah, blah. So,
yeah,
it's this idea that this happens at the best possible time, which, as I talk to people who are on the picket lines, especially at Warner, there's a belief that part of the reason the AMPTP hasn't come back is because Warner sees this as a good thing. This break. It's going to let them settle some of their internal stuff, figure out directions for their TV stuff, figure out directions for the Discovery Channel and TBS and TNT and all this kind of stuff. And it actually is going to work out great for them.
They need some breathing room.
So, all right. Speaking of a break, I haven't had one in a long time, and I have a meeting still after this. So let's give away our slab and wrap up here. Before we do that, though, I want to remind you guys all that if you have ideas, stuff we should be talking about on this show, you can tell us. We have a form that you could fill out on our website and tell us what you think.
I want to talk about comic books, and we'll go, okay, let's do that.
Right. We had a great suggestion come in this past week from someone. So I think the more you guys tell us, the more we'll talk about what you want to talk about. So
I will say next week, we already talked about our topic for next week ahead of time. We are going to talk about comic book awards.
Oh, yes.
And their effect on the comic book industry might be a bit strong, but their effect on comic books.
Oh, I had that down for the 28th. Okay.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll talk about something else because maybe we'll get an awesome suggestion from one of you.
It's true. All right. So last chance, hashtag EXP2K, hashtag EXP2K, all caps in the comments. go ahead and get those put in there. Last chance to get entered for the slab giveaway. 30 seconds.
Good luck, everybody. I was cheeky and I entered because I've been entering into all of them. So we'll see what happens.
Pastor Michael, the answer to that question is it depends on when you won. Some of the ones from early in the week have gone out already.
Yeah, there was somebody in chat that got one earlier, Matt268.
Right. Some of the ones from later in the week have not yet gone out. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, here we go. Here we go
now.
Curtis, my shop was called Sean's Anime and Comics, and it was called the Nexus 419, and now it's called the Storage Room Here.
John
Stout,
dude, awesome.
John Stout, congratulations on winning the slab tonight. Do you want to know what you've won? Should we show him? Because we forgot on another show. John Stout, you have won Batman Reptilian #1, CGC graded 9.8.
Nice. Little Garth Ennis love there.
Mm-hmm. So if you are John Stout, you need to fill out the form I'm about to put in the comments. bit.ly/exp giveaway in the next 24 hours in order to get your book. If I don't have the form by the end of the day tomorrow, by about this time tomorrow, the book will be given away on Wednesday.
And you're very welcome, John. John, it was a pleasure to get to meet you at Washington SummerCon. You wore an awesome suit, and now you're gonna have an awesome Batman slab to go with it. You wore an all Batman suit that had like Batman logos over it, over the tie, over the hat he wore on it, like a 3-piece style suit. It was pretty awesome.
It's true. Good. Congratulations. So we will be back next week at the same time. Tomorrow, we have the Dan Wickline show at 5 here on The Experience. And then at 8:30, Mint Hunter Comics. If you are normally a watcher of Minute to Skim It or in stores this week, I encourage you to tune in at 7 for the new Minute to Skim It, which will be me and Jen. That's a new format over there, so I encourage you to check that out. It's our comic review show. And then Wednesday, we'll be back with a whole bunch more shows. So, in the interim, it's been good seeing everybody. Thank you to Bronze Age Nerds. Thank you to everyone who's been here. Bueller, Curtis, Mr. Easy to Lucky, Collector P, Triple B, John Stout, everybody who's commented. I'm not going to be able to say all of your names because there's too many of yous. But just know we appreciate all of you being here all the time. And it's one of the greatest honors that I get to do is spend some time with you guys every Monday night with Bronze. So I appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. Enjoyed having a chance to talk about this important topic with y'all. And if you're watching on the rewind, let us know what you think in the comments down below.
Yes. And we will see everybody next time.
Join the party. Head over to our link tree to find all the links for everywhere The Experience is all the time.